Hi everyone. I was hoping to be really organized and make a detailed, well planned out video, but I've run out of time because I have a lot of other responsibilities. So I'm thinking, let's just do this. Now you may or may not have seen my demo piece. Let me put this under the camera. This is a activity that I did and kind of made adjustments to with a gal that does, she teaches painting with the Arboretum, the Hoyt Arboretum in Portland. She's fabulous, Elizabeth Higgins. Anyway, so we did part of this activity, and then what you see in the background is something that I kind of did on my own. But she was talking about how to journal using nature. And so she supplied a flower and we drew it and we painted it, and then I decided to add this background to it. So that's what I'd like to teach you today, is how to do something sort of like this. And I've done a few other examples I'd like to share with you. Let me put this right back up here. The first one is completed. I was up on Mount Hood this past weekend, and I'm sorry, the camera is not showing the details of color, so you can see that there's actually color on the mushroom here. But I tried to find some woodsy things that I could paint, and I found this teeny tiny mushroom about this big and was just enraptured with it. So I drew it. First I just sketched with a pencil, and then did some erasing and changing, and then went over my pencil lines with black ink, and then I painted using semi-opaque watercolors because I wanted to see what that would look like. I don't love that or how it turned out. And then I added to the background, and then I also added to the background again because I didn't like it. It wasn't dark enough. And then after it all dried, I added what people refer to now as Zentangles. So just some doodles and scribbles and little patterns in the background. You can do patterns that are comfortable to you. You can do patterns that you copy from me. It doesn't really matter. My favorite thing about doing patterns like this is that one of my favorite things to teach my students, I teach elementary art, is to tell them mistakes are okay, just make them fabulous. And if you look really closely at some of my details here, you'll see there are so many imperfections. And honestly, it's the imperfections that make our art fabulous and fun to look at. It wouldn't be exciting if it looked like it just got printed in a coloring book. So you can tell there's an unevenness here in this. So if you look closely, you can see that the lines are uneven and not necessarily pretty, but when you look at the whole picture from a distance, it's really a different thing, and you don't even notice those imperfections. So it's something that just pretty much anybody can do. You just have to be patient with yourself, and we'll do it in several steps. And of course, I have, video technology, so I'll be able to skip ahead and paste things in and all of that. And you'll want to pause it and wait and take a break and come back to it. The kinds of supplies you're going to need will be watercolors. Now, these are my fancy professional watercolors that are super pricey. I did not use these. They don't need to. I used them on this one, I think. But I didn't use them for today's assignment because you can just use simple things. This is, like I mentioned before, that I used on the mushroom, is they're semi-opaque watercolors from Faber-Castell, and they're great for, especially for younger kids, to learn how to paint. They're a lot like tempera paints, but they work like watercolors and are a little easier to manage. But I also didn't find I liked these because the colors were thicker and muddier, and what I really preferred cost me, I think, $1.79 at Office Depot or Office Max. No, I do not get kickbacks for mentioning them. It's just Crayola watercolors, and I think these are even the washable ones. And let me show you what I did with that. You can see it over here on the side. So I found this leaf, and that's what we're going to be working on today, or I'll be demoing today. But I want to encourage you to find something in your area, in your nature. And it doesn't even have to be nature. You could take off your shoe and draw it. If you like shoes, you could do your favorite coffee mug, or maybe a little knick-knack that you have on the shelf, but something that you can look at and draw. So what I'll be doing is demoing the drawing of this flower, and how to add paint to it, and then how to add the pens, which reminds me, in addition to paint, you will also need markers. It is up to you what kind of markers you choose, but I prefer Sharpie, and for this exercise, instead of using the fatter ones that say fine point, that look like this, you will probably want to use something with more detail, which this is called the ultra fine point. And you don't have to use the Sharpie brand, but if it is waterproof, that makes it easier if you decide you want to touch up some of the color after you've added the pen on. All right, let's get started. I'm going to set my things up. We'll do a quick drawing with pencil. Oh, I guess you'll need a pencil too. And then we'll move from there. All right, so I want to just talk a little bit about how to get that image onto your paper. I forgot to mention you need paper too. Watercolor paper is great. That's what this is. I've got, it's just Canson watercolor, and it's 140 pound. That's the one I use for the mushroom. But you can also use mixed media paper. This is a great one and not terribly expensive. I think I got it at Craft Warehouse maybe. And it's a mixed media, and it's only 98 pounds, but it held the watercolor really well. And oh, there's other artwork in there too, and allows you to have some control without soaking your paper. Okay, so if you've got your thing in front of you, I'm gonna just pretend like y'all have leaves, but you're welcome to use whatever you want. One thing that you can do is just trace, and I do that all the time. Another thing you can do is to take a photograph, maybe with your phone. You can change the contrast to make the lines a little easier. You can print it out. You can lay it underneath your paper, but if you have thicker paper, it's kind of harder to see. You can't see, you can't even tell. So if I had a, excuse me, COVID, if I had a printed piece of paper underneath, then I would not be able to see it. There are some apps that you can get with your phone where you can look through your phone and draw underneath so that you see what lines you're drawing. I find that to be highly challenging. So I'm just going to do the simple thing and create an outline by tracing. Now I am using different paper than I used from my other example, so I know it's not going to turn out perfectly, and I apologize that you will have to just stare at the top of my head while I'm doing this. I haven't quite managed the mastery of switching back and forth between cameras. Like I said, we're just going to get her done so that you can enjoy doing some painting during Women's Retreat this week. All right, here we go. Now the leaf, when I first did the demo, which was only one day ago, was quite a bit brighter and more pliable and not so crackly. So I'm just going to fake it till I make it. Now that's difficult to see with all the lighting in here, but basically I just traced around it. This is the perfect time to look for those details. Oh, I missed a whole half of the leaf here. Okay, I'm going to fake it. Nobody knows what that looks like anyway. Give myself just some roughed in lines. I'm noticing this little star pattern in the middle is up a little bit from where the stem is, so I'm going to make that be kind of the basis of all of those veins that go out there. And then once I've got the details done, I'm going to pull out my Sharpie. Hopefully one of these works well enough. And I'm just going to redraw on top of my pencil. If I decided I didn't like it, I can change it before I Sharpie it. But of course, once you get the Sharpie on there, there's no going back. And this is the point at which I tell my students, oh, just keep going. Make that mistake fabulous. many times with art, I see a huge glaring mistake and other people don't even notice it. And other times it turns out that my mistake is actually the best part of the art. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Actually, making mistakes is how we learn, and sometimes it's how we learn to do new things. All right, and then for these thinner lines, I don't want a really solid line, so I'm gonna do a little kind of dashed line, and then decide later if I want to fill that in more. I think on the other one I added some of those little side veins that kind of go off. Now you can take time and carefully look and reproduce the exact same leaf if you want to, or you can save time and just kind of get a basic idea. Now, one thing I know about these, because I was staring at them, is that the little veins that go off to the side are not directly across from each other, they're offset. So make sure you're looking for those kinds of details. Otherwise, if you just fake it and you didn't actually observe it that way, your finished product might look less than what you had hoped for. However, it just might make it more artistic. All right, so that was the basic drawing. Now what I'm going to do is just add color, and we'll have to do this in two parts. So we'll add color to the leaf first and then let it completely dry, because if you have any part in the center wet while you're putting on your outside, they will blend together. It might be that you decide you want to do something like that, and that's okay too. So I'm going to teach you a couple of different techniques. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can really see what I've got going on here. The first one I'm going to do is called, oh, let's see, I wasn't going to use that brush. I had another one. Here we go. The first one is called Wet on Wet. So I think I'm going to use mostly those orangey yellow colors. So I'm just getting, here, let's back out so you can see that. Be a good teacher. All right, so I'm getting my areas of paint wet so they can start kind of soaking up. I might want some green there too, so they can start soaking up the water and being more ready to use. Okay, now you saw me adding some water, just my first brush was a little bit dirty. Sorry about that. So I'm adding water, going carefully to the edges and not past them, so I'm not getting any paint past that edge. Now, one of the ways that I anchor my hand is by using my pinky when I'm painting. People have different ways of doing this, but that helps me to make sure I'm going slowly and carefully. The paintbrush that I have is a little thicker, so it holds a little bit more water and I don't have to dip it quite so many times. But you can see the reflection on my paper, excuse me, that I've got a nice wet layer sitting there on top of my paper. If you're using a thinner paper, it might soak in quicker and you get a different result, which is fine. You might enjoy what it looks like. So I'm grabbing some of this yellow paint here, just kind of wiggling it around so that those dried up little bits of paint are starting to absorb the water, kind of massaging it in there so I can get kind of a dirty yellow color. Now you can see I've already used this yellow and it's already a little dirty. If you haven't used yours and it's brand new, you might want to add a little bit of orange or a little bit of brown just to dirty it up so it's not quite so bright. All right, so when I put wet on wet, that was not a very wet wet, and don't be afraid to use your mixing palette over here. There, I'm going to add some more yellow. Oh, look, I went outside of the line, just like I said don't do. Okay, so when I add those colors to something that's already wet, it'll start to just kind of be interesting. There we go, that's a great example. And notice I'm just adding a little bit and it's kind of moving around all by itself. It's one of the fun things about watercolor is that it's pretty unpredictable. But I can look at this and see, is it balanced? Is it unbalanced? Does it look like there's too much color in one area? So this is a fun way to play. Maybe up in this area I want to grab a little bit of that green. In my original leaf I had some little green bits around there. Excuse me. So I'm just going to add just, whoo, that's a lot of green. Wow, maybe I didn't mean for that to happen. If you get to the point, of course I don't have any cloths nearby, where you decide that, here it is. If you get to the point where you decide, that's too much and I want to get rid of that, you can use a cloth or a paper towel or a tissue and just kind of dab it up while it's still wet if it's a little too bright. I actually kind of like that now, so I might put that back in. All right. So that technique where things are kind of mixing together on my paper, I really like that. Now I didn't get everything wet all at once, because if you get everything wet, it just gets sloppy and mixed together, and then one part dries before you get to the next part. And you can do watercolor in layers, so you can always come back and add more, but you rarely can add less. So I'm going to just add some water to this section. And maybe this section. I'm going to paint pretty fast here. Grab some of that dirty yellow. Move it around. Ooh, there's some fun things happening up here. I kind of like that. Not sure I love what that green did all of a sudden. Okay, I'm grabbing some orange. Now my paper was not very wet, so it's not spreading very much there. So if I want to, I might add a little more water. Kind of scoot things around. This is the fun playtime. Looking back at my original leaf, thinking maybe I want just a little more orange than that. I think it was dirtier. Maybe I really want to emphasize the dirty, darker color changing nature of this leaf and add some brown in there. Oh wow, that brown is not looking very brown. It's looking kind of orangey. Interesting. So I'm just kind of putting a little bit in there, moving it around, trying not to disturb it too much. I'm going to throw something over here as well. My son told me he's doing online school, and he said, "Mom, I've discovered that teachers think they need to keep talking as long as the camera is on them." So true. It's a little nerve-wracking to have silence. Okay, so when I'm looking at this, I see I kind of did a straight line with these orange dots, and I don't love that. I want to make sure I have kind of some creative balancing, so I am going to move some of that around and maybe, whoa, add some of those speckles. That's not really a speckle. Gonna remove that. Oh, kind of like what it did there. Put some yellow in here and see if that helps. Now, if you get to the end of this and you're like, oh, I hate it, it didn't turn out the way I wanted, you can just add on top of it. Teeniest, tiniest little green dots. I think I learned my lesson too well with that big green sploosh. All right, so work on adding whatever colors work to your piece, and then when you get it roughly like this, you're going to want to let it sit until it's totally dry. So we'll come back to this in a while when it's dry. So it's pretty much dry now. I did a couple of things that I want to tell you about. I used a big fan, but I noticed that the paint was really pooling here, so I tilted it a little bit to get the paint to come down. And then I also felt like it just seemed like the green was not really well distributed, so I added a few drops there. You can see it's still a little bit wet, just to kind of even out the color. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of wet on wet, mostly I'm going to be kind of pooling the colors together, but I want to be really careful around the edge. So as I get closer to the edge, I will use the pre-wetting the paper technique, and I'm actually going to leave a teeny tiny little space between the water and where the black Sharpie marker is, because I'm worried that the inside of my leaf is still actually a little bit damp. I'm not quite sure that it's bone dry. And I noticed that just as I was doing that, I went right over the edge, which is unfortunate, but it's what happens. Mistakes, they happen. So I'm going to do my best to kind of slop some fat color around. So I'm going to put quite a bit of water in here. Now remember, before I put water in my green, so it's lovely and thick, because it's kind of been soaking up the color. So I already know that that's good to go. And then I'm going to add some water to my blue, because those are nice contrasting colors. Contrasting is not quite the same as complementary. Complementary colors are across from each other on the color wheel, but contrasting just means like really light against really dark, or really different colors. So because these yellows and oranges are really light, blues, purples, and reds are great contrasting colors. Even if you wanted to do, did I say reds? Sorry. Greens, blues, and purples are great contrasting colors. Or if you wanted to do reds, that would be fine too. You could do reds and purples in the background, but using more yellow or more orange in the background would be, it wouldn't make your picture pop in the middle. So I'm just going to get my brush loaded up with some color and bring it in here. Now the trick is not to do too much everywhere. And so I'm just going to kind of add some splotchy, messy colors that are, some of them are watery, and so now I didn't pre-wet that one, so we'll see how that'll turn out. Some of them have a lot of paint, some of them have a lot of water, just kind of some variety with some white space in between them, so that when I come back in and add my green, I can do that without having a problem. So I'm just kind of working quickly. Let me back out a little bit so you can see more of the page. There you go. Just kind of adding some of those bright colors. Like I said, this is just Crayola watercolors, so you don't have to really have anything fancy. Sometimes it's the paper that makes the difference. So if you're having trouble and it's really soaking in quickly, that might be because of the paper you're using. So I got my watery green, and I'm kind of just dragging it into some of those places where there's space, because I want to see the colors separate from each other, overlapping each other, running into each other, but not turning into mud. And that's the tricky thing with watercolors, is to figure out that balance. And it's really okay to leave white spaces, because you could always let it dry a little bit and then come in and add more. Now I realize I'm doing that thing my son said teachers do on video calls, which is to talk over everything. So I will go ahead and do the rest of this, and then I'm going to switch over to my other painting that's already dry, and we're going to talk about how to add those designs with your Sharpie marker. All right, I think that looks pretty good for now. I want to make sure that there aren't any areas that look too heavy with one color or too light with the other color. I think it looks pretty even with some white spaces around it, and then when it's drier, I might come in and do an extra layer right on top of those. For the purpose of this demo, I am going to switch over to one that's completely dry and talk about how I do the background. Now, this leaf itself, the shape of it is really, what is that, 5 pieces. So we're already kind of divided diagonally. So what I don't want to do is to divide my page up exactly the same. I probably want to use some contrasting lines. We were just talking about contrasting. You can do that with lines too. So we're going to break our page up. Let me bring my other example in. Now this was a very round example because the flower was very round. But you can see that I have some sections going out and away from it like this, which is a very easy way to start if you have a round shape in the middle, is just have sections that are coming out from it that you're going to add your patterns to. When I did my mushroom, oh, it's in that book that's wet, so I can't pull that one out. it was a tall and then broad. So I kind of broke up the sections behind it. And I think I'm going to do that with this. So I'm going to just kind of arbitrarily make some sections here. So you'll want to break the background up into sections to start with, just some bigger sections, and then as you go you might realize, oh, I'm tired of this pattern, or I think I want something else, and that can be helpful. So all right, so I have some big chunks that are arbitrary. And then what I like to do is just find an edge and get started with something. So a really simple way to get started would be with straight lines. So I'll do some straight lines, and they don't have to be the exact same width. Sometimes I end up going, oh, they keep getting bigger and bigger, and then I go, yeah, that's a thing. I'll just keep making them bigger and bigger. Sometimes I just have two fat ones and then a skinny one, and I go, oh, there's a pattern, two fat, one skinny. Just kind of go with the flow. So I don't want to go too far, because what if I don't like the pattern that I choose to put in these stripes? And of course, feel free to move your paper around. So I think I'll do something simple like a loop-de-loop, just a long connected line. Now as I get close to the edge of the page, the pattern changes a little bit because I don't have anything to lean my hand on. It falls off. So at this point you might decide to take it out of your book and just do it flat. I like to leave mine in the books, so I just deal with it. Sometimes I'll pause or turn it upside down. Another thing that you can do is to do less and leave more space and then fill it in later if you decide you want to. So instead of doing the very next one with the same pattern, maybe I'll try that pattern by skipping a section. Okay, well, I kind of botched that. Also, I try to make sure that it looks like it continues, which I didn't do a great job of. Let's see, that would come around like this if there was another one there. So it looks like it continues beyond the boundaries. So you show a partial one. I'm going to do one down here. Now, one thing I noticed I did is they kept getting smaller as I went down further. I tried to prevent that, but yeah, mistakes are okay, right? Now at this point I could just leave it like this, or I could decide to add something else, maybe some, let's do that, diagonal lines. I'm just leaving a little bit of space, then a couple diagonal lines, then some space. I don't really have a plan when I start, I just doodle. And I think I want to do this one the opposite direction. Now when I was doing that, I wasn't intending to, but now it kind of looks like there's a lot of movement going on in this section, and I think that's fun. Later I might decide to add something extra, like putting something in this space. Oh, let's do that right now, like a diamond shape in the spaces. So the diamond shape is angular, and it contrasts against the roundness of the loops just above and below the shape. Now you notice that as I get to the edges, it kind of starts sticking out. Sometimes I just leave that and it's not really a big deal. Other times I'll go over it with a thicker, using the pen to make a thicker line, or I'll go over it with a thicker Sharpie depending on what I like. This is a really delicate looking object that I'm drawing, so I think I'm going to just stick with the thinner lines and try to be careful. So instead of having you watch me do all the things, what I'll do is I'll do some sections, and then I'll come back and talk about what I did, and then I'll do some more sections and come back and talk about what I did. So I've added another section. I wanted to point out that while I was working on that, I realized that I wasn't paying attention to my pattern of every other one horizontal and every other one vertical, and I accidentally made a mistake. So this whole row is solid, and I bet the first time you looked at this, you didn't even notice that. Another thing that I try to keep in mind is curves versus straight or geometric lines and angles. So I want to have a good balance of both things. I also want to see where it kind of leads my eye. So this is a really scoopy section right here. And so I don't want to put another scoopy section right next to it. If you're at a loss for what to do next, start with a simple shape like a straight line or a curved line. This one I started to do curved lines, and then I was like, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll do a checkerboard thing and split it up. Experiment on another piece of paper and try some different things. I had a piece of paper here. Let me go find it and I will show you just a minute. Okay, so sometimes I use a tool like this. And I'll just zoom in a little bit. This is something I got from a workshop that I attended, and it just helps to have some little sample ideas. So parallel lines, I was making a variety of different parallel lines, just straight ones, dashed ones, diagonal ones, ones with dots. You could doodle and fill in this section, and then when you're kind of stuck for what do I put in the next section, you could use this as a reference sheet. Contour lines, which with my elementary kids we also call those echo lines, but following the shape of something, I use those a lot in this, and they don't always have to be solid lines. You can use broken lines or a mix of broken and solid lines. Cross hatch lines just means things are crossing. You can do them in patterns if you want to. Crisscross lines, this is like a basket weave, and this is very often used in sketching these kinds of short lines. Also, cross hatch lines are very often used in like comic books or other simple line drawings. And then scribbles, now probably I would not use any of these scribbles in this technique, but spirals definitely. Random curvy lines. In fact, maybe I will use one of those ideas. I like the spirals a lot. And since I see a lot of spirally round movement here, I'm going to put it over on this side a little further away. And I don't want to do too big of a section, so I think I'm going to divide this section up and then just start making some spirals. Now, I've discovered that I'm better at making spirals one direction and not both directions. So if you decide you want to make them both directions, you can turn your paper, or maybe you can just draw them backward too. But I think I like just kind of squeezing them in. You can make smaller ones, you can make them overlapping each other. But the point is just have some type of repeating pattern that fills up the next available section. And sometimes I find the charm of it is when things aren't perfect. I think it makes it more interesting for things to look a little different. So I zipped ahead and completed this section. One thing I wanted to comment on is the addition of overlapping lines. So sometimes I'll find little sections in here where it just kind of looks empty. So I imagine one of these spirals, and if it were to continue, where would that line go? And even if it doesn't make perfect sense, just approximating the shape of the other lines helps it to look more connected. You'll notice that some of mine are fatter and some are narrower. I tried to even that out throughout the section. You don't always have to draw right to the edge of the page. Usually when things are framed, you cut off the edges anyway and don't really see that. And it's really hard to work on the edge right up to the edge of the page as well, unless you have it flat on another piece. All right, I think that is probably just about enough and you want to get started on your work, I would sure hope that you guys post what you get done. So this is one of my finished ones. I just wanted to put it up here one last time so you could see a variety of different fun shapes. Another thing I did with this picture is I went back in and added some of those crosshatch lines and some darker lines to show emphasis in my flower. I didn't really do that with my leaf. I didn't need to do that. Let's take a quick look at the other one that I left drying. So you can see that there's still quite a bit of white in there, and what I might do at this point while it's still a little bit wet is to go back in and kind of smooth over and join some of those colors so it makes a little more even background. The background, if it's not a connected solid color, will detract from the shape of the main idea that you're painting. All right, well, I sure wish you well, and I hope that you have fun trying this out on your own. I'm not quite sure if there is a way for you to post your finished pieces, but I will let someone in charge decide how that works and maybe let you know where you could post your pictures. We'd love to be able to see each other's work, I'm pretty sure. All right, well, happy painting and have fun.